Welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight. I'm Judith Kwoba, and today I have a new guest. It is George Jagatic, and George will let us in how he survived the voices in his head and how he got rid of them. I think that is a very interesting question. Many of you have left questions along those lines in the comment section. So I'm very happy to have him here to have his firsthand report. George, welcome.
Well, thank you, Judith. And thank you so much for the invitation to be here and to share my experience with your guests. And it's been incredibly profound for me to experience what I've gone through and to undergo some of the different ways of coping with the voices, and to see their response, and to really trudge through something that is so terribly intrusive in one's mind. And I've done both experiential and chemical ways of trying to battle the voices, and it's been quite a story. And what I truly believe is that there are some things that one can do that can lessen the severity and the intensity of the voices and can lessen their impact. And I think that's really the key here. The reason that I'm here, that I really want to share my experience and share this story, is to help other people and to get them to understand that there is something out there that is ego dystonic, that is separate from ourselves, that is causing these experiences in not just a handful of people, but thousands of people around the world.
Yeah, you wrote me, you sent me your CV, and I have to say it is very expensive. You have done a lot. You were very active in the dancing world, and you've been active in doing, was it group therapy?
Correct.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, so that you have the chance to mention those things that are important to you?
Sure, thank you. My background, going way back, is I've always fancied myself as an artist, as somebody a little bit outside of the norm in ways of expressing myself, in ways of moving primarily. Not necessarily as a visual artist, but as a movement artist, as a performance artist. And I received a 2 bachelors in my undergrad. I studied dance and I studied business. And I got out of school and I moved to New York, and I started a dance company, which was one of my big passions. And it was something that I felt very passionate about. We put on performances around the country, and it was just something that brought incredible joy to my life, and something that I feel, after this experience of hearing voices, has really saved me and taught me a lot. When I was performing, I was really curious about the effect that the performing and the moving and the dancing had on me, because movement has such a profound effect on the body. And that drove me back to going to school. I wanted to get my master's in creative arts therapy, which is in the field of mental health. And so I went back to school. I got my master's, and I studied and worked for about 10 years in the field of mental health. I worked both outpatient and inpatient. When I was working inpatient, it was in a psychiatric hospital, one of the biggest in New York City. And it was an amazing way to delve into the psyche. I worked with people who were schizophrenic, who were bipolar, who were acutely depressed, and it was interesting how, after beginning to hear voices, and after having this experience that I've had for many years now, I was able to really dive into, put myself in somebody else's shoes who was schizophrenic, and really have a sense of what they are going through when they talked about their voices. And I can look back prior to my hearing voices, when I was working with these patients, and put myself in that headspace and realize how off I think the mental health field is, how unclear about what it really means to hear voices, um, and how far we are from really understanding this experience, this phenomena. And it's been quite remarkable to experience both sides of that of that range, because growing being educated in the field of mental health, we're taught that voices come from our unconscious, or are part of who we are. And I firmly believe that there is something ego dystonic, or apart from my sense of self, in these voices, that there is something out there that is influencing us through what they say, through how they interject themselves into your thinking, into your thought process. And there's been many experiences over the last few years of my hearing voices that have proven to me over and over and over again that this is something that is not from inside, that is simply coming from outside, is simply other than me. And then that begs the question, well, what could that be? And that question is really, can take you in many different directions. I have no specific idea about what these voices are, but I do know how they affect a person, and I do know what some of their motivations are, and how they want to control a person.
Okay. Just one question. When I look at you, your picture is going boop, 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 up and down. As in, are you sitting in a swing chair, or is the camera not? Now it's. Yeah,
So
you can.
I can try to make that still.
Oh, okay, good.
Sorry about
Because
that.
I was getting a little bit dizzy.
Got you.
So
Okay.
it's going up and down. Yeah, no problem.
I'll make sure
So,
that.
did I hear that correctly? Your first experience hearing voices was when you were a grown-up, an adult.
That is correct. I didn't start hearing voices or experiencing altered realities until I was about 48 years old.
Wow. And can you recall that moment, and what did you feel, and what did you think about that?
It was, well, I have to say, Judith, that I was in a very dark place in my life.
Okay.
I had gone through tremendous stress. Working in a psychiatric institution is incredibly stressful. And what you have is technically you have to deal with countertransference and transference. You actually are so empathic that you begin to feel other people's emotions. And for somebody working in the field of mental health, it's incredibly draining. You deal with all kinds of stress that is induced from your patients. And it just ate away at me, because I loved the field so much. I loved the work so much that I really put my whole heart, and I put 110% of who I was into it. And so what happened is I began, unfortunately, I became addicted to amphetamines. And I would use that to escape and to try to pull myself out of the feelings and the stress that work was causing. And unfortunately, and it was a terrible decision to make. The amphetamines are incredibly addictive. They're the worst thing in the world. I actually have told many people, and I firmly believe this, that methamphetamines is probably one of the worst chemicals man has ever created. One of the worst drugs, because of how it changes you, how it alters your physiology. Excuse me. Now, I have worked in the field of addictions. I'm familiar with many of the practices and many of the ways that addictions play out. And as informed as I was, as trained as I was, it was very, very difficult for me to pull myself out of my own addiction. Now, I say all this because the voices came during that time that I was using. And what would happen is I would become paranoid, I would begin to see things, and I would begin to hear things, and I would attribute it to the drug itself. And at the very beginning, I would write off some of it as just a side effect of the drug. But when it became much more clear in terms of the visions, in terms of some of the things that I would see and some of the things that I would hear, it got me worried, and I ended up cleaning myself up, coming back to California. And when I got back to California, unfortunately, the voices never went away.
Oh,
And to this day, I still am hearing voices, but at a very, very different way and a very different degree. So there's a greater sense of control in terms of my own experience, in terms of how I handle, how I cope with the voices. But it definitely came from the addiction. It came from the use of the amphetamines. And when I look back and when I think back about how that first came about, again, as I said, I attribute it to the side effects of the drug. And and what happened was I had never in my life before experienced any hallucinations, any paranoia or any visions in my life. My life had been very concrete. And so this really, it expanded my perspective. It expanded how I thought about reality in so many ways. And to this day, I feel it just opened up an entire realm of belief system in how I look at the world and how I look at spirituality and how I look at who we are in this world as not just concrete, entities going through this world, but there is so much that is influencing us that we don't know about, that we are affected by. And the voices that I experience, I feel I have weakened some integrity, a certain spiritual integrity that I had with the use of the drugs, and the voices were able to get through. And to this day, there is still contact and there is still ongoing communication that I have that is intrusive, that vies for control, that tries to influence me in different ways. And I think one of the best things that I've done is learn to put boundaries up and really put up walls to help stop what I'm hearing come through. And that's what I want to share with your listeners and with the public at large in terms of how to deal with the influence that tries to get through, because it can be quite dangerous and it can really just alter lives and alter our world through our actions.
mhm. I had this subject with Jerry Marzinsky as well. And he, from his experience working as a counselor, he said that usually there is some type of drug abuse or substance abuse, be that alcohol, meth, or in your case, amphetamines. And since you worked in the psychiatric field as well, have you ever encountered people that didn't have some type of substance abuse or a very abusive childhood and or and developed those voices, or what triggers this?
So the traditional diagnosis for schizophrenia is hearing voices or seeing things, hallucinations, that other people don't. And when you look at how that plays out, you generally see these occurrences begin late teens, anywhere from 16 to 20 years old. That's where you begin to see these hallucinations and these voices really kind of start. And most people who are schizophrenic can have had some kind of major traumatic experience in their life, whether it's sexual abuse, physical abuse, violence, trafficking, some kind of horrible situation arise that has caused something to shift spiritually. And I'm not sure how that plays out, but something actually has shifted to where it opens them up to the voices. Sherry Sweeney, who Jerry Marzinsky is very close with and has done many recordings with.
Yeah, I have interviewed her 3 times, I guess.
She's great. She has a very, very great perspective around the voices. She talks about how the voices are attributable to traumatic events. So it's how that interacts with the voices and how that plays out. I'm not exactly sure. What I might say is that the trauma leaves one emotionally vulnerable and emotionally open to psychic forces that come in, and some type of spiritual wound that is open, and that is able to be utilized by these voices to really tear people down. And many people who hear voices really understand how they work to pull you down emotionally and kick up negative feelings so that they feed off these negative feelings. And that's a big part of how this plays out, is the voices really just want to eat this negative energy off of you and produce that through what they say and through how they influence you. And so it's terribly challenging to fight against this and to retain one's sense of self and one's sense of confidence and one's sense of belief in oneself. And it takes a tremendous amount of work, a tremendous amount of effort. I think one of Sherry's programs that she really talks about and she has utilized and has helped me is the It's a Lie program. And that whatever the voices say, whatever you experience coming through to you, you say that it's a lie, and that they influence, and how they're trying to build up your belief system doesn't have the intended effect. And that is the biggest way that the voices affect a person, is they change their belief system. There's constant building up of what they want you to believe in. And if you say it's a lie, and if you understand that what they're coming through is simply an attempt to affect control over you, and you put that down and say, no, that's a lie, I don't believe that, then you can put a boundary up, and you can say that, no, who I am is better than what you're trying to make me believe. And you're trying to tear me down, and you're trying to eat off this negative, this physical drain that you're causing in me.
So in other words, you experience that if you do that and you call them out and tell them that's a lie and I will not buy into this, that the voices recede?
They don't necessarily listen, but they respond to that. The voices are constantly responding to everything that you say and everything that you hear. And it's this interchange, this back and forth of maintaining a sense of centeredness, a sense of groundedness, that telling the voices it's a lie helps you. So it's the It's a Lie program is certainly something that is incredibly effective, and it really helps to maintain one's sense of self. The other thing that I do that I feel is incredibly important is overtalk the voices. So when I think in my head, the thoughts that I have a voice. So when the voices try to get through, and when they actually talk, I overtalk the voices, and so I don't hear or experience what they're saying. And so if I'm unable to hear them, they don't have the influence. They don't have the ability to build up some belief system within my own self. And I'm able to maintain my sense of self through that. So It's a Lie and Overtalking the Voices. Those are two incredibly helpful and beneficial ways to stay centered, to stay grounded, and to keep these negative entities at bay while they try to continually drag you down.
Mhm. When you had this first experience while you were working in psychiatry, and later on you said, when I moved to California, then the voices stayed. That first experience, you connected that to the amphetamines, yeah?
That is correct. Yeah.
You did that right away. And so was that, what type of nature was the message of those voices?
Well, it was interesting because when I would start to hear the voices, they were incredibly negative.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to kill you. We're going to shoot you.
Mm.
And what that did is that kicked up a paranoia in me. And so I would leave the house, or I would go about my daily activities, and I would be hearing these things of the voices wanting to hurt me. And that was incredibly horribly stressful in terms of going through my daily life and always being worried about something that's coming up around the corner. Again, the voice is trying to build up a belief system. We're going to shoot you. We're going to kill you. There's people around that know about you, and they would try to get me to believe these things that they would tell me, and I wouldn't, and I would do my best not to. But when somebody is in your ear and very, very adamantly saying that person around the corner is watching you, and they're part of our mob, and they're going to shoot you, they're following you, and then let's say coincidentally somebody begins to go the same way that you are, your mind begins to wonder. And so it was very easy to build up a sense of paranoia. I want to share a quick story here
Mm.
that was really interesting, that for me really concretized my belief that the voices are from something outside of myself. And that was early on when I first started hearing the voices. I thought, oh, again, because I was a mental health professional, I thought, oh, it's from my subconscious, it's from my unconscious. These are my own thoughts, these are my own fears and feelings. And the voices, as I had stated, were trying to build up some paranoia and trying to build up some fear in me, and we're going to do this. I would be on my computer, and they would tell me that certain things would happen, and my computer would shut down, or strange things would happen with my computer. And so I thought to myself, well, I'm going to try to have an effect on the voices. I'm going to change the password of the Wi-Fi, but have somebody else do it so I wouldn't know, because the voices knew basically everything that I knew. As I would think it, they would respond to it. So I had a friend come over, and I told my friend, I said, can you change the password for the Wi-Fi so that I can't know what it is, so I can't be logged in? And then we'll see if the voices can get in. Is there really something concretely outside of who I am that is having some effect on the computer? So he came over. He was in one side of the house. It was a big apartment in New York City. I went into the other room, and I went to the bathroom to wash my hands. Did not want to know what was happening. Did not want in the least to know what he was changing the password to. One of the voices said to the other voice in my head, he's changing the password to password. Now, this is new information, absolutely information. Not only I didn't know, but I didn't want to know.
Mm.
So I immediately went to my friend and said, are you changing the password to password? And he startled and looked up and said, yes. How did you know? Now, again, this was information from outside that I heard. And it really made me feel that there is something going on that I'm experiencing that is inducing, this knowledge. And it's not coming from me. It's not a part of who I am. So it was a very interesting experience to firmly ground myself in the fact that I'm battling and going to be dealing with something that is outside of myself. I feel like, going back to your question in terms of, what was the topic of what they were doing and why they were doing this. There's an aspect of putting a certain paranoia, a certain fear, in inducing those feelings so that I would not use. Now that's an interesting perspective to look at it, because it certainly has helped me stop. And I've been sober now for a couple of years and have really cleaned up, and my life has turned around, and I've gotten much stronger, both mentally and physically. But there was an aspect of what they were doing that drove me away from the using, which, as I've said before, methamphetamines is probably one of the worst drugs ever, and is incredibly addicting. And so you need something just as powerful to have somebody put a stop to what they're doing and not use. And I think there was an aspect of what I experienced that was part of that. Now, has it stopped? Has it really ended? No, it hasn't. And that's where this interesting aspect of control has come in. And I look at the using as eating away at some mental faculty, eating away at a certain spiritual body of mine that allowed the voices to come through. And now that I've healed and kind of gotten my sobriety back, there's a tremendous amount of control that they want to establish and to maintain that I'm fighting against.
Were you surprised when you moved to California and the voices stayed, they became permanent?
I was. Excuse me. It absolutely was. It was something completely unexpected, because the pattern had been that as long as the drug was in my system, I would hear the voices, which was about 4 days. And physiologically, when you take meth, it'll stay in your system for 4 days. After about 4 days, it cleans out. Now, that doesn't mean that the effects of it go away, because there's definitely damage that occurs. And I feel that the buildup of that damage over time has been a part of the maintaining hearing the voices and their ability to still get through. And I think that over the course of time in my sobriety, as I have begun my recovery and gone through healing, that the voices and their influence have gone down tremendously. They've gone down from, let's say, a 10 to a 2, on a scale from 1 to 10. And currently, I'm much more able to maintain a sense of control, maintain a sense of self, and deal with the voices in a way that doesn't allow their influence into my life. And slowly, I'm seeing the voices diminish and diminish and diminish, because they don't have the control that they thought they had, or that they were trying to establish.
So in other words, with a lot of work, and you really have to stay focused and do it, and not get lazy and, oh yeah, today I skip it.
No,
you can reduce that to a level that is at least manageable. And then in your experience, they are still getting less and less and less. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. It's definitely on a trajectory of going downhill. And where I see that specifically linked to is their control over me, their ability to influence me. If they can't influence me, there is no motivation then to maintain that connection. And many people wonder about, again, why is something trying to influence you? What is out there? What has this ability? And I think that there are different possibilities of where this might come from. Many people talk about archons and about archonic activity out there, that there are beings or entities that have this ability to communicate and want to establish control over over people, and that they not only do people who have, let's say, weakened spiritual bodies or weakened mental facilities, but each and every one of us, they're able to have some kind of influence. Now, Sherry Sweeney talks about having a negative thought, and that thought being induced and is not a part of who you are. So that what you do is when you have a negative thought, you say it's a lie, and you go back to living positively, or trying to be the best, or not trying to, but being the best you can be by negating those negative thoughts. And if those negative thoughts are induced, whether archonic or technological, or how, wherever they come from, demonic is, a lot of people talk about the demons that these voices are attributed to. But it's that negative influence, that negative thought, of the way of inducing these negative thoughts. For example, I was walking down the street one time, and just out of the blue, I had a thought that said, I should go kill myself. Now, at that time, I had no desire, I had no intention, I had not thought about suicide, no suicide ideation at all. And it was completely out of the blue. It was absolutely random. And at that time, I wasn't hearing voices, but I was taking a medication that one of the side effects was suicidal ideation. And I realized, I was like, wow, how did a thought, something that clear and that specific, how did it come from nowhere? And it begged the question, where do our thoughts come from? And I think Jerry talks about this quite a bit. One of his big questions going through school was, where do our thoughts come from? And if you go down that rabbit hole of thinking of where do our thoughts come from, and you consider the fact that something can be influencing our thoughts, it really begins to make a person think that you have to do the work. Just like you were saying, you have to be vigilant in terms of not only your thoughts, but your feelings, and questioning yourself, is that me? Or am I being influenced? Is that me? Or is something inducing that? Is that me? Or do I accept what I'm thinking? Is it part of me? And you can actually begin to carve out, actively carve out a sense of self, apart from just accepting what you're feeling and experiencing in your everyday life. So it is, you have to take an active role in maintaining what you accept in your thinking, what you accept in how you go about dealing with the thoughts that go through your head. And I think it's so important to understand this, because if there is something that can influence you negatively, if there is something that say feeds off negative energy, that it can be so easy to turn somebody, or to lower somebody's vibrational frequency, so that they're producing this negative energy and feeding these entities, or drawing you down, so that your behavior is not as positive, as strong, as confident as you could be. So there's many different ways to look at this, but the question still remains, am I being influenced by something outside of me? Is this thought mine? Is this thought something that I want to hold on to and maintain as part of who I am? And that is where we have to be active, and where we have to take control in terms of what we're doing.
Was there a time where you sought help from other professionals, because you initially made that connection between the amphetamines and the voices, and you knew that the classical understanding is that is coming all from yourself and it's hallucinations. So did you seek help in the medical field, or did you fight that all by yourself?
I did. I did. I turned to the psychiatric field, and I did so because the voices are intrusive.
Hmm.
You know, they were something that was causing stress and causing strain in my life, and so I wanted to go to an institution that had been established and had been putting out that what they do can actually help these symptoms, the drugs, the medication, the psychiatric uh, field uh, has an entire area of work, study, and medications that are supposed to help reduce these symptoms. So of course I turned to that, thinking that maybe a pill would help. And you know, it's so interesting because Jerry feels very strongly about the psychiatric mafia and about how what they're doing is just not helping in the least. And what I'm bringing to the table is my own experience of, you know, turning to psychiatry, getting medication, and going through this horrible experience with the medication myself, and how it really didn't help the voices, and how when I started taking the medication, the intensity of the voices went down a little bit, maybe from a 6 to a 4 on a scale from 1 to 10. But I had incredible side effects. It disrupted my sleep patterns. I had akathisia, meaning I couldn't calm down. I was constantly moving. And that was horrible. I couldn't sit still. It was absolutely one of the worst things I've experienced. These antipsychotic medications were really, really awful in terms of some of the side effects, and did not take away the voices. In fact, after a while of being on the medications, the voices came back from a 4 to a 5 to a 6, and I was still taking the medication. So I weaned myself off it. Jerry helped me quite a bit to understand how these medications really are poison to the body. And when you talk about psychiatric medications and how they affect the mind, and there's ways that each one of these medications affect people differently, so that your side effects are going to be different than my side effects, different than somebody else's side effects. And yet they have no guaranteed result in terms of what they're supposed to do, which is getting rid of the voices. And that is just tremendously disappointing when you talk about somebody who's in distress, you know, who's experiencing these voices and needs help and needs relief. These medications may cause a small amount of relief, but overall, with the way they change your physiology and the way that the side effects occur, it can be even worse to the overall quality of your life. And so that's why some of the ways of dealing with the voices, like Sherry's It's a Lie program, or Overtalking the Voices, or doing things to establish boundaries and maintain a sense of self, are so important, because they have had, for me, they've had a greater effect than the psychiatric medication, which really just did not help. And I think overall, what its intent is to medicate, to tranquilize people, and not to really get at the fact that there is something out there that has an ability to break through our our mental systems, break through and communicate with us in ways that we have no idea about. This is a field that nobody talks about. Now, when you look at the people who hear voices, you hear frequently that they don't want to talk about it, because as they talk about it, people will think they're crazy.
Hmm.
That's the typical line. I don't want to share that I hear voices because people think I'm crazy, and people don't know what to do with that. And I think if you look over the course of time, people who have heard voices, who have experienced altered realities, who have gone through these experiences, have been a constant throughout human history. And we have to really begin to understand that there is something that is causing this, that is able to be affected by what we do internally and how we think and how we can protect ourselves from it, or how we can understand these voices a little bit better to protect ourselves.
Mm. How did you stumble on Jerry Marzinsky?
Jerry, it was really interesting because Jerry has a page on Facebook, the Hearing Voices community. And I was at a point in my experience where I was actually having a neutral or a positive relationship with the voices, meaning I was communicating with him back and forth.
Mm.
And the voices told me, they said, get a hold of him and talk to him, because he can be important in your life, which was interesting. And I did. I actually ran a couple of Hearing Voices groups, and I invited Jerry to join us. And Jerry came on, and we started talking, and I shared with him my experience. Now he'll say that, and he'll back me up on this and say that most people do not want to talk about the voices. And in fact, the voices have told me, and you'll hear this from other people as well, that they'll say, don't talk about us.
Mm.
There's many patterns that the voices run. And when you look at the patterns play out significantly in everybody that hears voices. And one of those patterns, the voices do not like you to share, to open up with other people about what the voices are saying. And it's a way to isolate a person psychologically. And when you begin to isolate and turn inward, you begin to just listen to the voices, and then they can create these belief systems in you much easier. If you talk about the voices with other people, as I did, their ability to influence you and their ability to isolate you and turn you inward is extremely diminished. And the strength that they had in influencing who I am was taken away. And again, I feel that has been a saving grace, because what I'm fighting to maintain is my sense of self and my sense of who I am, apart from the voices, because the voices, they they are affecting a certain sanctity of mind. And I think that's something that we have to really honor and appreciate. And in fact, and it was something that this experience actually said to me very early on, before I realized they weren't going away. They said, what do you think of sanctity of the mind? And at this point in my life, I feel it's so important. So if I could give you an example, I actually wrote down a quick quote of what the voices say to me on a constant basis.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if I could share that with you.
Mm-hmm.
This is 30 seconds of what I experience almost every waking hour.
Mm-hmm.
And the voices are constantly talking, constantly just babbling on and on and on. Now, if I talk, the voices will pause, which is why my over-talking has a way of blocking out what they're saying. But when I stop talking, when I stop thinking specifically, or reading or something like that, then the voices come through. So there is an interruption. There is a way that they've come through and taken away a certain sanctity of mind, a certain peace. And this is an example of what I hear on a daily basis that goes through my mind if I'm not being proactive in putting up these barriers, or thinking, or talking. Okay. We have made so little headway. If you are doing this to understand us, we don't want you to understand us. We are done, and we are waiting for you to start your job, and then we will be done, and you will have signed your own death warrant. This is not to be effed with. We are not doing this together. It must be done together. I'm going to kill him because this is a person. And we have to talk to you now. I'm going to kill him. We cannot. You're driving us away. And that is what Jerry wants, but he does not understand us. We can't do this with you. You have to do this to yourself. We are teaching you, and this is what we get for saving your life. We are not doing this. You are doing this to yourself. You have to give us gratitude every time you hear us. And
Wow.
this goes on and on and on and on. So this is the interruption to your personal space. This is the taking away of sanctity of the mind that the voices do, because anytime your mind goes idle, this is what I'm hearing. Now, it seemed a little broken up because they're talking about this is not to be effed with, or this is something else. What they're referring to is as my emotions change or shift from one thing to another, they're responding to that. Or as I think about something, if I think about going on a motorcycle ride, they'll respond to that with a comment. And so it's a constant state of communication, of responding to my internal experience with no time for peace. And that's where, again, I feel this sanctity of the mind is something that I certainly took for granted. And I think it made me think about how are these entities influencing each and every one of us without our knowing. And that's from the way that they affect not only what I hear, but what I feel. And I truly believe that these entities are having an effect and influencing each and every one of us in subtle ways that we have no idea.
Do you have the impression that in the psychiatric field, slowly but surely, there are some psychiatrists, counselors that are willing to entertain, at least to entertain, the idea that the classical definition might be wrong?
It's such a ivory tower. That psychiatry is such an ivory tower. And the thing is, when you're talking about medications and how it affects the mind, it's so challenging. There's let's say a dozen different medications for depression, and each one affects a person differently. And so what most people don't understand is that psychiatry, it's a guessing game. If you go to a psychiatrist, the psychiatrist may diagnose you with something and then give you a prescription for medication, but we'll try this one, and then we'll see what the effects are. And then if not, if you don't like it, then we'll try the next one. And it really is this guessing game. And so it's so, most people really feel that doctors know exactly, oh, if I go to the doctor and he prescribes me this, then this will happen. And it's not the case. It's not the case. We are all so individualistic and so unique in our physiology and our mental makeup and our of course, our spiritual sense of self. And these medications affect us all differently. Now, what you're speaking to is psychiatry shifting? Are they going to open up, and are they going to allow this possibility of something greater to come into the field of a biologically based system? And when I say biologically based system, I mean what they're looking at is they're saying, oh, well, there's some physiological component within you that is broken, that needs this specific medication to be fixed. And that's not the case. If we're looking at these entities as something other than physiological, as a spiritual component of who we are, we have to take into consideration what they say. And we have to take into consideration that these entities have a certain motivation. We have to ask ourselves, What is that motivation? What is going on here? Why are they communicating? Why are they talking? Why are they trying to influence us? And those questions are the big questions. Those questions are the questions that we really need to consider and understand as a way to help us deal with what we're hearing, specifically for people who are hearing things. Now, I will say this: there has been a groundswelling of people who do hear voices, who have gotten together, who meet and talk about their voices and talk about them in ways that are very different than how psychiatry approaches hearing voices. Because I would say about 90% of psychiatrists will tell a patient, take this medication and ignore the voices.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wrong on two counts. First of all, the medication, it has, I think, horrible side effects for the most part. And secondly, you cannot ignore the voices. It's impossible. What you can do is you can actively try to put up boundaries and put up uh, uh, thoughts or read or listen to music that blocks them to a certain extent. But if you are in a quiet place and if you are just allowing your mind to soften or go idle, they come through and it's impossible to ignore them. You have to actually put energy into blocking them. You cannot just ignore them. And so if if there is something that is coming through, we've got to take some time to understand that better, to talk about what they're saying, to really understand how to either work with what you're hearing, or block it in a way that the influence doesn't come through. If people who heard voices really understood the importance of maintaining a sense of self, maintaining a sense of inner sanctity, I think it would be extremely helpful to the field at large when we talk about coping with these experiences, coping with these altered realities, because you cannot be so malleable that the voices can influence you and affect change in terms of your behaviors and what you do. Jerry tells this story of very interesting and scary story of how he knew this one person who heard voices, and the voices told him to go to a certain place to find some marijuana. And he went up in the mountains, and the voices told him to go through trails and turn left here and turn right here till he found this field of marijuana. And the voices told him to get the marijuana and then go to a certain park and sell it. And he made a ton of money, you know. And so here, this person is being influenced every step of the way by what he's hearing to do something that he might not have done without it. Now,
But how, excuse me, but how, if that is not the first experience that I hear, and how can science say these are just hallucinations? They do not make sense. It's just going on in your head, and then out of the blue, you know where the marijuana field is, and
right.
you go selling it. It doesn't make sense to think that oh, it's just in your head.
It all comes down to belief. First of all, you're trusting me right now that what I'm telling you is true, that my experience is true, okay, and that I'm hearing voices. Um, it, it, I have no way of proving what I'm hearing other than some of these ways of, let's say, writing down verbatim what I'm hearing, or interestingly enough, as a side note, we've done some EVP recordings, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with EVP recordings, but uh, there is an interesting field out there that is trying to record these voices, record them in a way that actually allows a person to hear what somebody is hearing who hears voices. So we're slowly chipping away at this disbelief that somebody's actually making this up. that it's coming from outside of them. Okay, it's easy to say that, oh, well, whatever you're hearing is created by your unconscious. You know, you're creating these characters, you're creating what they say, and that's easy to say. And it's affecting a much broader belief system when we consider that these voices could be spiritual entities, could be aliens, could be demons, could be angels, could be something greater than what we are. And it begins to really expand the mind and challenge our thinking.
Mm.
And, you know, when I tell the stories of what I did about the voices telling me what somebody was doing in the other room, or the voices telling me a week before something happens that it would happen, and you know, it just it for me, I truly believe 100% that there is something outside of me that is communicating and affecting me.
Mm. Yeah.
And now what do we do with that? What do we do with that information? And I think it challenges religion. It challenges you know, how we go about life, that we're not the only people out there. I think humanity as a whole wants to feel that we're the only ones in the universe.
No.
And it, right.
I don't want to, and I think that is nonsense because so much space just for us little kids on the block here.
Yeah. You know, but so much of that has been a part of religion. That
Mm.
religion has said, you know, Adam and Eve story, we're the only ones here. But we're not. We're not. There is something greater out there that is coming through. And I think it when we are dealing with something of this to this magnitude, we can't just immediately, you know, bring the aliens down to the planet on a spaceship, because that would cause you know, imagine the impact and the effect that would have. I think it's been a process of chipping away at um, at slow, not maybe not chipping away, but slowly opening us up to different realities, to new possibilities, by talking about this, by writing, you know, creating movies about aliens, and allowing us to consider what that might look like, you know, the books and fantasy and all this stuff. Um, and it's happening. It's out there, and people are slowly opening up to the possibility. And I see it as a process. I
Mm.
see this as a process of slowly opening us up to something greater in the universe that is out there. Now, how that finally comes through and how we are actually able to say and definitively say this is extraterrestrial, this is angelic, this is spiritual, this is demonic, this is, you know, how that plays out, I don't know, because we're not there yet. All I know is that the experience that I'm having, hearing these voices, is real. And it has affected me. It has affected my motivation. It has affected who I am. And it puts into my mind the question, you know, these people that take guns and go out to rock concerts or go to schools, elementary schools, and kill people. What if they were hearing voices? What if those voices actually made that person believe that what they were doing was being told to them by God? Which, when I first started hearing the voices told me, we are the voice of God. And I said, no, you're not.
Yeah, right. So yeah, and there are these even these psychotronic weapons, you know, artificial telepathy,
Mhm.
yeah, where you hear the voice as well, but actually at the other side, there is a real person sitting and targeting you.
Exactly. And you know, technology has been a big belief system that these voices have made me consider,
Mm.
because there is definitely a personality behind what I'm hearing. Okay,
Oh yeah.
they you know, they make jokes to me. They will laugh sometimes early on, not so much now, because we're at a very antagonistic place in my experience with the voices, where I'm actively trying to block them out, and they don't like that. They want to come through. They want to have control. They want to have some kind of influence. But prior to that, um, there was real personalities that are behind what I'm hearing. And those personalities, when you hear them constantly, as I reported to you earlier, 24 hours a day, when my mind is soft, they're responding to my inner thoughts. He's, if I'm walking into the kitchen and beginning to make some dinner, he's walking into the kitchen. What's he doing in the kitchen again? He's going to get fat. No, and it's this constant story that plays out, and you build this relationship, you build this connection to what you're hearing, and they want that. They want you to establish a strong connection so that they have influence and so that they have this kind of control over you. Anytime that you block that out, anytime that you put up those boundaries and take away their influence, they don't like it, and they can attack pretty in pretty intense ways. Like they'll wake me up at night, in the middle of the night, and they'll as soon as they wake me up, they'll immediately be telling me, we don't want you to block us out. You have to listen to us. You can't, you stop, and in fact, they did this to me just the other night, 12 o'clock at night. As soon as I woke up, I was in a deep sleep. As soon as I woke up, the first thing they began to say was, you have to listen to us. You cannot block us out anymore. You have to listen to us. And then I immediately put up my boundaries, put up my walls, began over talking them, and eventually went back to sleep. But that disturbs your sleep cycle. Mm-hmm. And over time, disturbing somebody's sleep cycle is torturous. It's just it eats away at you, and they know that if they can establish a connection and maintain that connection over a long period of time, they can slowly erode at whatever they want. They can slowly manipulate you into believing certain things that might have an influence in terms of how you behave, in terms of what you do.
Yeah, even that. I worked for a couple of decades as a flight attendant internationally, meaning my sleep cycle was completely out of balance. Sometimes I worked during the night, sometimes I had 9 hours time differences, sometimes 6 in one direction or the other, and so on and so on. So yeah, I can recall flights, especially back from the West Coast of the United States, because those are really long flights back to Germany, where I felt I just turned 150. It was so exhausting. Wow. Yeah. And if you have that day by day, plus the voices, yeah, I can see.
Yeah, it's really, it can be terribly stressful, terribly difficult to maintain that sense of self through this exhaustion, through physical and mental exhaustion each and every day. And it's insidious. It really is insidious. Now, what's interesting is that there are many people out there who have ongoing relationships with the voices in a very positive way.
Okay.
And again, you had asked about this earlier. Is psychiatry coming around? Are they opening themselves up to considering how to deal with the relationship of the voices? And that got me interested early on. Now, I have to preface this by saying, and backing up a little in terms of my story, when I first started hearing the voices, very negative. It was about killing me. It was about creating a sense of paranoia and stuff. And I immediately said, if this is something bigger than me, I open myself up completely, and I'm transparent in terms of how I feel and how I think. I said, this is incredible. This is amazing, and let's work together. Let's come to a place of how can we work together. That's where I was coming from, and they would come up with these lines that were so unbelievable, like "We are the voice of God," or "You are Jesus," or "You're a prophet," you know. And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm just George. You know, I'm just George. But you know, who are you? And you know, what's going on here?" Early on, the voices were very collegial with me, and we became friends, and we would joke, and they taught me things, and we tried all these different things. And it was very interesting because for me, when I look back at it now, I see that as very Machiavellian, because what they did is they built that connection. They established that connection through a period of time that the relationship with the voices was amiable. Now, um, jumping back to kind of what we were talking about in terms of how the field is changing, there is a groundswell that of people who are more willing to talk about their voices and who have joined the Hearing Voices Network. And they're able to share with other people what their voices are saying, and share ways in which, you know, my voices don't want me to eat chocolate, and I'm, you know, I really like chocolate. What should I do? And, you know, this was an example of a conversation I had with somebody in one of the Hearing Voices group. And we begin to look at the relationship of what you know, you and what you're hearing, and how, what kind of relationship should we have with voices in our head, certainly is one question. But what's interesting to see is that other people have different ways of relating with the voices. You know, I know somebody specifically who is a computer animation designer, and he and the voices get along. He has one voice that tells him what to do, how to design certain things, gives him ideas, and he's had this voice in his head that he talks with for the longest time, who actually influences his work. I have another person I know who the voices talk to him about how he writes and what he should write about, and, you know, gives him ideas and stuff. And so it's interesting to see how different people relate with the voices, and are actually either inspired or cope with, or sometimes even draw strength from the voices. Now, we have to look at the downside of that. You know, for me, that beginning time where the voices were being friendly with me was a way to establish that connection. But then very quickly they went to a place of they wanting a tremendous amount of control. They wanted me to be vegan. They wanted me to move out of the home I'm living in. They wanted me to marry somebody that, you know, I totally was not interested in marrying, but they were very insistent about it. And when they got to these extreme ways of these extreme ideas and these extreme suggestions, I hesitate to say suggestions because they were really demands. You know, when you hear something in your head, you've got to move out of your home. You've got to move out of your home. It's much more than just a passing thought. You know, you have to really draw strength and put some activity into counterbalancing that thought into a firm affirmative, no, I am not going to move out, and this is why. Now, I've gotten to the point where, again, as I've said before, I'm past that point of relational communication where I argue with the voices and I just block them out, because what's my priority is this world, what's in front of me, what the people around me, they are my priority, not the voices in my head. It's not, I don't want their influence. I don't trust their influence, and I've blocked them out because it's this world that is the priority. And that's what I feel is important for people who hear voices to balance, is that there's an influence that's coming through. You have to ask yourself why it's coming through, why they want to influence you, and are you pulling away into an internal experience in a way that sacrifices the external or what's really around you? I know somebody who's in their 70s who hears voices, and basically they have no friends, just the voices, and they say that's who their social life revolves around, is their voices. And I it saddens me, because it's like, imagine if they didn't have the voices, they would put that energy into actually people around them. And so there can be a tremendous negative influence on focusing on building a relationship with the voices, on having that kind of constant internal connection that has to be uh, put in check.
Hmm. I find that very sad that psychiatry is still very close-minded in that regard. But we we find that pattern all over the place, even with the corona nonsense now. There is no such thing as an open dialogue among doctors, scientists, whatever. And instead of learning from each other, you have these camps that hate each other. And of course, here on YouTube, no different opinion is allowed. We, the Truth Ministry of YouTube, we tell you what you can talk about and what you can't talk about. And and that way, I think it's a really big obstacle to finally learn and get to the bottom of this, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. This overarching sense of how we are controlled.
Mm,
That question of, from the government on down, and what is above the government, and
yeah.
there are so many ideas that are around, about the information that we're getting, and what we're doing with that information, and how that information is controlling us. And we have to constantly ask ourselves, what is, how am I building my reality? How am I building my perspective about life? And life is so much greater than what you actually see around you. There is so much more that is going on around us. And how do we find that information? I think it's really challenging to find those sources that we can really trust and that we can really believe. And it's important to have those resources, to have that mental capacity to open up your perspective, and to think greater than to challenge what you're being given, the information that you're being given. We've got to continually challenge that. And I don't think those forces that are in control want us to challenge those, and to put those questions out there, and to challenge what we're hearing, and to really ask ourselves, is this how is this reality, the reality that's around us, is that what I want to believe in? So it's we've constantly, I think, are at a place of battling what we know and what is real around us.
Mm. So we have different characters of voices. Some feel inspirational, at least to the person that encounters them. Others are very harsh and negative. So, plus, we live in a society where a lot of control and a lot of things run on guilt, shame, failure. And so, did you ever have experiences like that the voices try to send you on a guilt and shame trip?
It's interesting you say that, because the voices know exactly what you're thinking. They'll
Okay.
respond to what you're thinking, and they'll respond to what you're feeling. Uh, which the feeling part, responding to slight changes in feeling, really threw me, in terms of how could technology do this. I'll give you an example. So imagine something that you really love, that you feel passionately about. Go to your happy place in your head around that thing and notice how you're feeling. Now shift and turn to something that you don't like, maybe a food that is disgusting to you, or something that you don't like. Notice that shift in feeling. Okay, now that subtle shift in feeling in your emotional state, the voices will respond to, and they'll notice that. Now, when I think to myself, how could technology do that? You know, and respond to that subtle shift in feeling. You know, that's where it puts the question into my head around: is this technology, or is this spiritual? Is this angelic? Is this demonic? Is this something greater than what I can even explain? Um, you talk about um, this experience of oh no, your last question just flew out of my head.
Yeah, that if you ever had the impression that the voices are trying to send you on a guilt and shame trip.
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you for pulling me back to that. Because what comes through sometimes with the negative voices can pull me into an emotional state of feeling shameful. They will bring up the past experiences. Of course, when I was using and when I was in my deepest part of my addiction, there were certain things that I did that I'm not proud of.
Yeah. Okay.
And of course, if I think about that memory, they will enhance that, and they will come at me and say, that was you, you're a horrible person, and try to drag me into a shameful state. That shameful state has an energetic component to it. And that's where you begin to feel drained. And that's where, when the voices can take you there, there's this demonic element to it. And there's this way of looking at how the voices do that, and why would they want to take me there? Why wouldn't they want to elevate me up and focus on my recovery and focus on the better person that I am, and consistently over the course of my life have been, a better person? Then these moments of, bad behavior. And when it's constant, when the voices constantly take you back to those places of shame and negativity, that's where my mind begins to think, these are demonic. These have very negative motivations. And that's really where I go to putting up boundaries and stopping and blocking what they say coming through, by overthinking them, by playing music, by watching TV, by reading, by repeating things in my mind, whether they be prayers, mantras, or chants. Jerry and I have done a lot of work together, and he's written an excellent book with Sherry Sweeney around
I have it.
understanding. Yes. Oh, great. So you've read his book.
Mm.
It's a great first step if you are interested in understanding a bigger picture of this field of the mind of psychiatry. It's a great first book to read. What I want to point out there is that Jerry and I, in the course of our working together, have come up with a list of patterns that the voices run. Now, establishing that the voices are outside of oneself, one way to do that is to establish the fact that they run patterns similar in each person. Okay, so what you'll find in terms of what I hear may not be the exact same thing content-wise to somebody else, but the patterns are the same. And one of those patterns are the voices try to drag you into shame, into these negative states of being, shame, guilt, remorse, all these, really down feelings, and then siphon off your negative energy and just hold you in this negative state, make you feel horrible. And that's one of the patterns that you see play out over and over and over again in the voices. Another pattern that you're going to see is that oftentimes these negative voices respond negatively to positive religious or spiritual practices. So reading the Bible, prayers, meditation, going to church, believing, holding love in your heart, things that elevate your frequency things that elevate your sense of self, the voices will react to negatively. Now, it's interesting. My voices were really tricky, and they were really Machiavellian in a lot of ways because I have a rebellious streak in me. And so what they would do is they would push me towards the Bible, and they would say, read the Bible. You've got to read the Bible. Read the Bible every day. This is important. You've got to do it. And so the rebellious side of me would say, I don't have to do what you say. I'm not going to read the Bible. And so by pushing me towards it, they actually knew that I would be driven away from it. And so I've had to deal with my own feelings, of rebellion, of dealing with authority in a way that maintains a sense of self through this, maintains hopefully a scientific perspective of what works with these voices and what doesn't. And, as I've said before, over and over and over again, what I know is that if you block their intention, if you block what is coming through to you, you're maintaining your sense of self. And I think that is, just to underscore again and again, one of the most important things that a person can do if they are hearing voices, if they're getting some kind of influence from outside.
You mentioned that sometimes your voices, they had a conversation about you.
Yes.
And have there ever been more than two characters, or has it just been these two and they stuck with you?
Well, it's interesting because early on, when I first started hearing the voices, there was a cast of characters of 4. There was a mother, a son, and 2 daughters. Now,
Wow.
what's really interesting, Judith, is that I early on went to a neurologist, and I said, I'm hearing voices. I want to be tested for X, Y, and Z to see if there was some bigger issues going on in my head. When I went to this neurologist, when I sat down with him, and we went through the basic questions, and then he asked me a little bit about the voices, and he says, tell me a little bit about them. And I told him it was a cast of characters of a mother, a son, and 2 daughters. And he put his pen down and he looked up at me and he said, I just had somebody come into my office this week who said the exact same thing. Now, to have 2 people go to a neurologist and ask and tell that person that they were hearing the same cast of characters in their head, to me, speaks to something greater that's going on, a pattern that is happening around and being used in ways that we don't fully understand why this is happening, but multiple people were experiencing that same psychosis at the same time. To me, that's really speaks to something that is outside of who I am, outside of my own mental subconscious or unconscious. So yeah, it's when you asked about how the voices can pull one into, bring up guilt, bring up shame, bring up these feelings, it does pull one to a state of, why do they want to drag me down? What is going on here? This is a lower vibrational frequency. This is pulling me into a state of guilt and shame, and a place that I don't feel is good for me, good for my mental state.
Yeah. Has there ever been a point on that road to recovery where you felt, I throw in the towel, I have enough, this is too much of an uphill battle on a daily basis? Did you experience that?
The thought has crossed my head. What is my breakdown going to be? But you can't. You can't. I can't give in to the voices and let something that is external to me have a sense of control. The voices want me to ask every time I leave the house if I can leave the house. They want me to be vegan. They want me to ask and ask them every time I do something if I can do it. And it's a ridiculous place to be mentally. And so I just I take it every day, one day at a time. The thoughts of breaking down occur to me, but I believe in my heart that eventually given the trajectory that I've been experiencing, eventually what's going to happen is the voices will go away. And if I continually put up the boundaries and am clear about they don't have control over me, that they'll eventually dissipate. And that's my hope. They've certainly gone down from, on a scale from 1 to 10, from a 10 to about a 2.
Okay,
And
wonderful.
they're only they have intermittent periods of 3s and 4s where they attack me and really come at me in a way that disrupts what I'm trying to do in my daily chores or my daily activities. I work full time now, and for the most part, while I'm working, your mind is in a higher state of focus. I'm much more focused. I'm much more concentrated. I've got a different level of thinking. I'm working on concepts and writing and this kind of thing. And generally, when I'm in that state, the voices can't get through. It's when my mind gets idle, when there's a pause in what's going on around me. That's when they come through, and that's when they start making comments about what's going on around me and try to influence me. And so it keeps me aware of the optimal state of being of my mind. As long as I'm really focused on things, as long as I'm working on something, then I don't have to worry about the voices being there. Like for example, right now, you and I in this discussion, I'm not hearing anything. In the background, barely in the background, I can hear just a little buzz, like a fly in the background, but there's no words. As soon as the interview is over, as soon as our conversation is over and my mind rests and I'm beginning to walk through the house from one room to the next, that's when they'll come back, because your mind is at ease. And what they've done is they've taken away again, a certain sense of peace, a certain sense of inner sanctity. And I have to work to block them out and maintain that part of myself that has that sanctity of the mind, that can establish that is who I am.
Mm. Do they also have the habit, because you just mentioned this interview and when it's finished, they might come back. Do they also have the habit to comment on people that you are talking to, or that you're, let's say, that are in your family or that you are friends with? Do they have that habit?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, because what they're doing is they're trying to establish a belief system. So, for example, I'm going to speculate here, but after this interview, I'll be quiet in the house. I'll be walking from room to room, and they may say something to me like, "Oh, what you told Judith was a lie. What you told and they'll come at me, or they'll say, "You shouldn't believe Judith," or "You should call it." I mean, they'll make comments about it.
Mm.
And they'll try to drive a wedge between me and the reality of what is in this realm, in this realm. Another example very similar to that is if you go to meet your friend, and if your friend is not in a good mood and it has nothing to do with you, but he kind of takes it out on you, the voices may say, "Oh, he doesn't like you. He's pissed off at you." And they'll make you believe, they'll want you to believe in them more than what is around you. And that's where communication comes in. Because what most people would do who don't hear voices would say to their friend is, "Hey, are you okay? Are you, what's going on?" And they would ask their friend, "What's happening?" And just to check in to see if it was something that they had done. Well, the voices don't want you to do that. They want to, again, draw you into this inner world, and they want to isolate you. They want to pull you away from society so that they can have control, build up these belief systems. So yes, they're constantly making comments about people around you, about what's happening, about whatever they want to build up this belief system so that they have control. They want you to believe them more than what is around you. And that's where it gets dangerous, because again, that's where I really feel that these, possibly, some of these horrible situations with guns and where mass shootings, could have been influenced by these voices, pulling somebody in and saying, no, the world is an awful place. You've got to kill these people. And having somebody with the inner state that was unable to fight against the voices, to push back and say, no, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. And here's how I'm going to clear that up or check on it. I'm going to communicate to that person. I'm going to talk to somebody. One of the biggest things for me that was a saving grace was that I shared with people what the voices said. So, for example, the voices for a long while really tried to get me to be vegan and get me to not eat meat at all. And I tried for about a week, and it just wasn't me. It's just not part of who I am at this point in my life. And
That is probably also too fast. If you really want to do that, start with a day per week.
yeah, yeah. I mean, but they were very demanding. And what I did is I ended up telling my family, I was like, yeah, the voices are trying to get me to be vegan. And we laughed about it and we talked about it. And the energy, it took the energy away. It took the influence away of what the voices were saying. It's like I brought in others around me in this world. I brought them into my experience and I shared with them, this is what I'm hearing. What do you guys think about that? And Jerry was wonderful, because when I would share with him a lot of times what the voices were saying, he would just say, oh, that's ridiculous, and this is why. And he would give me feedback that would help support me along my road to recovery, along my road to establishing a strength to push back against the negative voices.
Have you caught them ever in a blatant lie? I mean, that the entire undertaking is very manipulative and deceptive. That's a given. But let's say that they told you something about a person that you know, and you knew 100% that's bullshit, what they are telling me now about that person.
It was a little different. I didn't have necessarily that experience of a blatant lie that the voices would tell me about a person. What they tried to do is, at one point they tried to get me to believe that I should marry this person. And they were telling me, oh, this person loves you, this person is, and this person is perfect for you, this person, you've got to be married. We will leave you if you marry this person.
Yeah, sure. And heaven is a merry-go-around.
Yeah. And it was the most ridiculous thing. And because I didn't follow up on it, and I pushed back and I said, no, that's a lie. First of all, this person doesn't love me. I'm not going to marry this person. This isn't something I would do. I would initiate on my own. It was completely outside of my sense of self. And it was just a bizarre situation. And that's the one thing that comes to mind in terms of that example.
What would you tell people, let's say friends, family members, what can they do? What is helpful to human beings that are in that type of situation?
Well, there's a couple things that I think I want to share with your listeners about this experience. Is that people who hear voices, they're experiencing an internal world, an internal experience that is just as powerful as our external reality, is what's going on around us. And these entities, they have the ability to influence us, each and every one of us, not just people who hear voices, but each and every one of us. And we have to question our thoughts. We have to continually raise our consciousness, raise our awareness to the level where we say, is this coming from me? Is this me? Is this something I would initiate, or is something trying to influence me? I think the more that we all can do that, the more that we all can say, no, that is a thought that I disavow. I rebuke that. I disavow that. That is not part of who I am. The more we begin to do this, and we begin to elevate ourselves into a higher consciousness, the better we'll be able to maintain some independence from the voices. Um, but when it comes to people who hear voices, uh, uh, I think one of the most important things is don't be ashamed. You know, don't think that it's just you.
Mm.
Um, Talk about it. I think one of the things that was one of the biggest saving graces for me is that I did talk about it. I shared. I said, look, um, I don't know what's going on, but I'm beginning to hear voices. I'm hearing a voice in my head, and here's what the voice is saying.
Mm.
Now, there was, and from the very beginning, I said, not only to the voices, but to my family, I said, I'm not going to lie to you about this, because this is a mental issue I'm having. This is some, very, very profound experience that I'm encountering. I'm not going to lie to you about it. I'm going to tell you exactly what's going on. And from the beginning, that sharing and talking about it saved me, I think, in so many ways, because I was able to get feedback from the external world, from this world. This is the priority. I've said it before. The world around us is the priority. I didn't isolate, I didn't pull inside and allow the voices to build up some belief construct that pulled me into a behavioral direction that what goes against who I am, or could take me in some kind of weird, strange direction. God forbid, hurting somebody, or doing something that I wouldn't normally do.
Mm. So now you have been on the road to recovery for quite a while. Now, what would you say? What is your strongest feeling? What these voices really are? Do you tend towards technology, or do you think it's entities in the unseen realms? And what is your hunch? What is really going on there?
No, thank you for asking that. Yeah, it's a great question. I um, right now, my belief system varies on two sides. I really believe there's a spiritual component to this,
Mhm.
because as I recover spiritually, as I kind of find uh, uh, and reestablish a connection to God inside of me, I feel the intensity and the power that the voices have over me has gone down. And so that spiritual connection is a big part of it. And that spiritual connection, I use the word spiritual because I want to open that up into something greater. It's that part of this life experience that we can't see and we can't put our hands on. It's where faith comes from. Each of us have a different definition of what spirituality is, but my um, my taking spirituality and really not taking it for granted anymore um, has been an important part of my recovery, and an important part of what I feel these entities, these voices are, because they do react to uh, behaviors that go in line with positive or negative. Okay. So
Mm.
if I'm doing something along a positive frequency, or a positive vibrational level, they'll respond to it, and generally respond to it by decreasing the frequency or the intensity of the attacks. Um, there's also a technological part of this,
Yeah.
that voice to mind technology, voice of God technology. There's personalities that come through, and some of the controlling factors and some of the ways that the voices speak to me, very authoritarian. It kicks up a lot of my behaviors in the past, and it says, no, you have to be under our control. It really makes me think of technology, of kind of big brother, of wow, what if they were able to do this, and how, and do they want to um, be able to establish influence and control via some kind of telepathic, some kind of communicative way, other than what we hear around us.
Mm.
And technology plays out quite a bit. So I'm kind of 50-50 in terms of where this comes from. I think an interesting story might be that, what if we actually have encountered aliens? What if there are groups of people who are having conversations and have exchanged uh, tools and technology? And what if there is some kind of uh, organization out there that is testing out some advanced systems on people? And what better group of people to test something like this out on than somebody on the fringe of society, somebody who is, in the throes of addiction, and using, and is spiraling down. What better way to test some new technology out on it? And that was a storyline that played out in my head.
Mm.
But yeah, it's a belief system in me that has many storylines that I feel are interconnected. And as to the end picture, as to where this is going to go, I have to maintain that sense of hope every single day that it is going away, and that I do everything I can to maintain my sense of self and to prevent some kind of bizarre influence or change in my own belief system that might change my behavior in a way that's not truly who I am.
Mm. Yeah, I'm also 50-50 there, because I'm pretty sure there is electronic harassment for targeted individuals,
Mm-hmm.
and that might feel very well like, oh, I'm going schizophrenic.
Right. Yeah.
And they even, I forgot the title. There is a movie about that, where two young gentlemen, and they are being targeted, and then later on it turns out that one of these rogue government agencies, they had rented an apartment in the same building as they did, and they targeted them from there.
Yeah. Just in the news the other day, an ex-CIA official was talking about how he was in the embassy in Russia, and all of a sudden he had tremendous migraines and felt that it was a microwave attack specific that has not gone away after years of this one single attack. So I asked myself, if we have the technology that's out there that people know about, that is like this microwave technology where we can affect somebody's physiology from afar, these microwave uh, beam attacks, that what if we have this voice to skull technology, and what if they are targeting people, and how this plays out. And again, it's been known that governments will test things out on fringe parts of society, because again, they are trying something out on a group of people who can't necessarily defend themselves, and defend themselves in a way that actually has some traction. How do I make this public in a way that actually um, begins an investigation into where this is coming from when you can't track it?
Mm. Yeah. Do you know that we almost talked for 2 hours?
Oh, that's amazing. There's a lot here.
Yeah, but yeah, it just flew by. So, what would you, let's say, as encouraging words, if somebody is in the same situation, or a family member, a friend, what would you give people as an advice?
Uh, it goes back to this belief that we're not alone. We
Mm.
are not alone. And whether that not being alone is a spiritual entity, an angel, a demon, whether it's an alien entity, or whether it's technology. It doesn't matter. Our thoughts are not our own, and we have to consider our spiritual experience in this world, and we have to think about where our thoughts come from, how our mind is built, how our belief system is built, because our planet is becoming so divisive, and we are being pulled apart. I think with COVID and with, you know, keeping us sheltering in place is pulling us apart. And that's exactly what the voices do. They want to isolate you and pull you into this internal belief system that they create. Very matrix, you know. We need to maintain those connections and those relationships. We need to maintain a sense of communication with each other, so that we can share our experiences and really figure out the truth of what's going on around us. Because what's happening in the outside world for me is very similar to what the voices want to do internally with me. They want me to isolate, they want me to pull in, they want me to believe in what they say, and they want me to do what they say. And I don't want to, we can't give our freedoms up. We can't give our sanctity of mind up, you know, for the greater, for something that we don't know anything about, and we don't know what its intention is, and we don't know what its motivations are. And I think it's so important to question our thoughts, to communicate, to share with other people. As a therapist, of course, you know, I'm a big proponent of talking, and you know, I think it's interesting how the voices have been interested in me, in my experience in this. Very early on, they said to me, let's see how he copes with this.
Oh, boy.
You know, and for me, the only way of coping is to share and to talk about it and to say, this is my experience. You know, I can't lie about it because it's real. And I don't know what it is necessarily, but I know how it plays out. And I know it affects us. And I know we have to be strong in terms of who we are as individuals, so that something bigger than us can't have that kind of influence and control over us.
Yeah. I think these are perfect final words. What am I doing here? I am, yeah, okay, now I've got it. So, George, I would like to thank you very much for being so straightforward and opening up and talking about this, because this is not an easy subject and it needs to be destigmatized.
Amen. And thank you, Judith, for asking me. You know, again, it really does need to be destigmatized. So many people out there really feel like if they experience a different reality, if they experience something different from what other people say, that they are ashamed, that they can't talk about it. And again, each one of our experiences is so profoundly unique, and we need to share that. So destigmatizing hearing voices is so important. And I really hope that this affects, if you're listening out there, and if you know somebody that hears voices, or if you do hear voices, that you do really begin to open up about it and talk about it a little bit more, and see how that affects what your experience is, what your internal experience is.
Yeah, exactly. I would say the same. And I find it very hopeful that there are people out there like Jerry Marzinsky and yourself. And Jerry told me that there are very few, but slowly there are coming some counselors who take that into consideration. So, and I think it's a long way still, but we cannot just leave that trail and go back to being silent.
Amen. It is a very strange new world.
Yeah. So, whoops. So this was it, guys. Night flight for today with a wonderful George Jagatic and his experiences in the realm of the unseen world. Thank you for listening, and stay safe and sound out there. Bye-bye.